Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Today's guest is Scotty Sports Psychology's Erin, Ayala, and this is a good one. This episode is going to blow your mind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's so important, really, right? And I know this is sometimes sounds cliche, or that's what it's the next frontier, but it is when you see athletes, especially athletes doing something like Leadville or these really hard, big, long events. It is such a big piece, and I shouldn't even say long events. It could be very hard events. You're pretty equally matched with someone. You're going up a hill as hard as you can, and there is a mental aspect. Who wants it? How bad do you want it? Is the Matt Fitzgerald book we often reference that is great as well. And so these are elements that you can practice as far as self-talk, as far as visualization, as far as even your pre-race routine and goal setting are parts of sports psychology. So there's a fair bit to it, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah, we were actually just having a conversation the other day talking about Leadville, and when you think about the cyclists who are coming in 6, 7, 8 hours, they actually, we're going to argue, have almost less of that mental game that they have to play with themselves compared to the people that are, about to hit the 12-hour cutoff point. For those people, the mental side of things, if you actually start looking at all the math on the watts per kilo and all that stuff, it kind of all, as you were saying, comes apart after the 10-hour markers. And after that, there's just so much that can be attributed to the mental game and the, can you keep pushing as things...
Constant forward motion, for sure. They're out there. I don't know if it's more. I'm sure Keegan Swenson is motivated.
Fine.
And I always, people just said this to me, oh, you look so put together and you don't have negative self-talk. And I said, I waffle between quitting the sport and going pro again weekly.
It's true.
And so it's just a train wreck, and you will hear that from most pro athletes that they want to quit a lot of the time, and so they can reframe that and refocus quickly often. They don't often have a lot of time to move with it, but it is indeed true for everyone. But I think you're right that the athletes who are out there for twice as long in something like Leadville or Unbound just have a lot more time to sit with the discomfort and tell themselves bad things.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally double the time that they have to be thinking about it.
And perhaps are dealing with things like walking, right? Keegan Swenson is generally not walking in a lot of these races, whereas someone at Leadville is going to walk, probably hours, maybe, depending on someone at the 12 hours, maybe not hours, but probably an hour, maybe. They're stopped or walking. And so there's a lot of time to reflect on walking in a bike race, and you can be prepared for that. Again, this is visualization, expectation, which really ties into that mental preparation.
Yeah. All right. So many gems in this episode. Definitely, let us know what you like. Let us know you want to hear more of. I could have talked to her all day, so we're definitely having her back on. But without further ado, let's get into this with Scotty Sports Psych's Erin, Ayala. All right, Erin, welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I am so excited. I'm also so confused as to why we have not done this sooner. So welcome.
I know, right? Thank you. I'm stoked to be here. This will be a fun conversation.
I'm also just going to try really hard this whole conversation to not be super jealous of the fact that you are somewhere warm and I am not. It's fine. Everything's fine.
I know. I just flew back. So Minnesota is home for me. So we had that super frigid, which I'm sure you also had. And so I'm training for Mid-South Double right now, which is the middle of March. So it's 50K run on Friday, 100-mile bike race Saturday. And I looked at my training plan to find the 2 highest volume weeks, which is the first half of February. And I was like, I'm getting the heck out of Dodge. So I'm in Arizona. It's going to be great.
Oh, so smart. And I'm so jealous of Mid-South as well. That's high on my bucket list. We're so close to making it work, but we'll have driven past it to go out for Valley of Tears, Peter's racing.
Yes. Yeah.
So then we would have to backtrack. And I'm like, I just want to be somewhere warm after that. So
that's fair. Yeah. It's a vibe. Add it to your list for sure. And for anyone listening, it's it's like a season opener in so many ways. And you get to see everyone after hibernating for the winter. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's back up and,
Hmm.
get your quick backstory. So, how did you end up in sports psych? What's your sort of like background as an athlete? Clearly, you and I are very similar in like the bit of an all-arounder endurance athlete, I'll
Hmm.
say.
Yep.
So yeah, how did you get
Yeah.
it? How did you come here?
It's funny. It was kind of accidental in a lot of ways. I often joke I was a very mediocre JV athlete in high school. I did it for fun and social stuff, but I wasn't super competitive, multi-sport athlete. Didn't do any, I think I saw the inside of a gym like 3 times in college. I did not work out. And then in grad school, I was like, I need to get my act together. And so I started running for self-care and then really quickly got the running bug. That turned into marathons that I did for a few years. I've done, I don't know, 9-ish, probably quite a few. This was when I was in upstate New York, and I was a PhD student in counseling psychology. So I was trained to be a professor, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I'm still figuring it out. I think I finally found it. And so then marathon running turned into triathlons because my friends were doing tri, and I was like, well, I want to try that too. So I did, worked our way up to Ironman Lake Placid, which was a really cool race. And then moved to Minnesota, didn't feel like joining a pool or master's swimming group. And it was just more logistics than I wanted to deal with. So I just started riding more. That turned to racing. So I was a roadie for a few years and then fell in love with gravel. Gravel stole my heart. So, and I'm still doing that. I'm a multi-time Unbound 200 finisher, Unbound 100 single speed, Mid South single speed. I really just like to mix things up and keep things fun and rad. And then got a little bit burnt out from cycling this past year. And so I started running again, and it's been great. So sports psych was kind of accidental. I was a grad student. They needed someone to teach a sports psych undergrad class. They were like, well, Erin, you run marathons, you'll be fine. And I was like, I've never taken, let alone taught sports psychology. And this is what they do to grad students. They'll be like, here's the syllabus, you'll be fine. And
That is
so I
so funny.
figured it
You run
out.
a marathon, you do psychology, therefore
You
sports
can teach.
psychology.
Yeah, done. So as I was teaching it, is I was learning it, and then I fell in love with it. And so I still did the kind of the professor track for a while, and then I picked up a part-time sports psych gig, fell in love with it, went all in, and then started my own. I was in a group practice for a few years, and then started my own private practice in April of 2023. So we're almost to the 2-year mark. Based in the Twin Cities, but we can serve athletes everywhere, depending on licensure and their needs. So we do performance coaching in all areas, which we'll talk about some of that stuff today. And then mental health therapy for athletes, because we are a unique bunch. And if you're doing therapy, you need a psychologist or a therapist who asks about your sport life, because it's a huge part of who we are. So
Oh,
that's a quick and
yes.
dirty of who I am. Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you and I definitely have a very similar sport background, with the exception of our high school and early collegiate. Mine is sort of flipped with yours,
Uh-huh.
non-athletic high school and then very athletic in college.
Got it.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but no, I love that. Also, I'm right with you on the pool just becomes such a pain in the butt when it
Yeah.
comes to like training for triathlon. And also, frankly, I got really sick of having orange hair because
Yes.
and just
Yeah.
like dry, crunchy, just all the
Yep.
time. It just wasn't
Yep.
great.
Same.
Like helmet hair is bad enough. Uh,
Yes. Hmm. Yep. Yeah. So, and I was not great at swimming, so it was easy for me to let go of it. So,
right there
yeah.
with you.
So,
Right there with
riding
you.
and running, that's my jam.
Perfect. Okay, so you also just hosted a really incredible virtual summit, and
Yeah. Hmm.
I want to just like shout this from the rooftops because when you mentioned it to me when we were chatting before and I like looked at the
Hmm.
list of speakers, my initial reaction was just like, holy crap, how did you get all of these people to, find
I
time on a
know.
weekend to like this was just
It
some
was
pretty
incredible.
impressive array of speakers and the depth of topics you went into. So talk a little
Hmm.
bit about how that came to be and just, how people can
Hmm.
still check it out because I know it's
For
still
sure.
available.
It is. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of reasons I did it, but as former professor, I like to teach, I like to moderate, I like to bring people together. I love to learn. That's one of my values, is this love of learning. And at the beginning of the year, athletes are always inundated with this new year, new you message. And I'm like, no, new year, same you. Like, you are still the same person that you were yesterday. Nothing has changed. That said, we care a lot about health and wellness, and there are a lot of grifters and influencers out there. There's a lot of stuff about these. I often kind of joke these 3 hour routines with the natural daylight and the meditation and the green power, whatever drink, and the sauna and the infrared sauna and the cold plunge. And like the list goes on. The mouth tape. Like
Who has the
let's keep adding to
time?
the list, right?
Oh my
It's just
God.
not for the everyday athlete. No, we don't have time. Like we have jobs, we have kids, we have families, we have career, we have all these things that we're doing. It's just not sustainable. Let alone diet culture at the beginning of the new year, which is huge. And so we wanted to, the Scotty Sports Psychology is my company. So the Scotty team, we wanted to put something together that was more realistic for athletes who wanted to prepare and create a strong foundation for their upcoming season in a sustainable way. And so I was really picky about speakers. I am also surprised that so many of them said yes. We had a keynote each day, Saturday and Sunday. Marley Blonsky was the keynote on Saturday, talking about her journey in cycling and talking about sizeism in sport and how we can be allies for people of all sizes. And then we had a trans athlete panel on Sunday for the keynote with Rach McBride, Max Posnecker, and Juliet Seuss who's a coach over at Chapman University in Southern California. The title of that was why trans athletes need more than your awareness. And it was a really cool way to open up the conversation, say, hey, we're going to be talking about the tough stuff, and we're going to do it this weekend in a way that is really curious and empathic and open and supportive. It's about community. It's not about rights and wrongs. It's not about proving points. And it was so cool. So then we brought in we had 7 speakers each day or 7 presentations. So we had 14. We recorded all of them. We've got strength training for endurance athletes, bone stress injuries for endurance athletes, intuitive eating. How do you actually do that as an athlete? Diet culture, like body positivity and why that's BS. You name it, we got it. We had a sleep scientist come in, meditation scientist. It was so cool. I was nerding out the whole weekend.
Oh my
And
God.
so,
Just like, did you just
yeah.
like make a list of just like, what are the trickiest, most
Uh-huh.
nuanced, difficult to deal with topics, and
Yep.
how can I get them
Yep.
all in one
Yes.
weekend?
That
I
people
love
often
it.
misunderstand. And it's like often it's like it's the basics, right? We keep trying to reinvent the wheel and do it in this new and sophisticated ways when often that's not necessary. And so the speakers at the summit helped the everyday athlete kind of saying, okay, here's what the research actually says. And then kind of debunked some of those myths and then gave actionable takeaways. That was kind of part of what I did as the moderator and organizer behind the scenes. We loaded up the speakers with resources to make sure they could deliver in a really good way. So then everyone was able to walk away with some really tangible tips, tools to support their season. So it's still available. People can go to scottysportspsychology.com. We'll, provide links in the show notes and whatnot. But it'll be lifetime access. We had the pre-summit talks. So I think there's 22 talks. They're all recorded. And we've got like a reading list of all the speakers that shared book recommendations and like you name it, we got it. It was super fun.
I don't even want to ask how long it took you to pull all
Oh
of
my
this
gosh.
together.
It was wild. Yeah. And expensive. So we did it for free for live attendance.
Right.
Yep. So we'll probably do it again next year, but with more people and more support. So it's not just me and my online business manager.
Oh my gosh. I love it.
Yeah.
Count
It was
me
great.
in. Count me invested in that. I love that
Yes.
so much.
Mhm.
And okay, this brings up, and yes, we'll include all of those links in the show notes.
Mhm.
Definitely, everyone should check that out. This brings up such a kind of like broad topic that I did want to touch on with this idea of, we're putting this out. It's going to be like towards the end of February when this is out.
Mhm.
So we're kind of through the new year, new you.
Yeah.
But with endurance with any athlete, there is
Mhm.
still this odd like difficulty balancing the, as you say, new year, same you, but
Mhm.
with the like, I do want to change. So
Yes.
how do you think about the idea of like holding space for you as you are now as a like,
Mhm.
flawed but still like, perfectly imperfect human
Mhm.
while wanting to improve and progress and
Mhm.
like, you know,
Yes.
have that finish line makeover montage moment.
Totally. Yeah. I'm really, really big on values-based work. So, and you think of, some other thought leaders in the field that like Steve Magnus and Brad Stallberg talk quite a bit about this. And as a psychologist, I use a form of therapy. It's called acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the core components of that is knowing what you want to stand for or work toward in life and how, essentially how you want to show up. And so, what I always say to my athletes is we can't start to set goals for your season unless you first know what your actual values are. Because you could, get podiums or a new, FTP or cat up. But if you're not proud of how you did it, you're not going to have much to, you're not going to be satisfied. And then that's this, what we call the hedonic treadmill. I'll be happy when I cat up. I'll be happy when I win this stage race or this omnium or this or that. Then it's such an empty foundation. Like, so you have to start with your values. So for the athletes who are thinking like, okay, I'm like kind of the jitters, right? We're starting to feel them. We're looking at the race calendar. We've got X number of weeks left. Okay, we're getting excited. So I always say, fast forward to the end of your season and ask yourself one question. How would you want your teammates, loved ones, and competitors, and coach, if you have one, to describe you and how you showed up this season? What words do you want them to use? Right.
Ah,
And that's the goal. That's where the money is. And you can only pick three because if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. If you value 20 things, you can't lean into all 20 of those things. So let's take an example of someone who values family. Their goals are going to look entirely different than someone who values health because they're coming back from a cancer scare. Right. So or someone who really values grit, or I'm trying like, yeah, love of learning, right? There's all of these that courage, community. So you've got to pick your values first, and then you can start to set goals. And that's where we kind of get back to what you're saying is start small. James Clear talks about, start like really small, like set a goal to put your shoes on, your running shoes, right? Set a goal to drive to the gym without actually going in. So if it's family, and speaking from experience, I'm not great at calling my father. He would love it if I called him more often to say hello. So if I really valued family and wanted to lean into that, it might be like, okay, I'm going to call him every other Sunday, instead of like, I'm going to text him every day if I know it's not realistic. So you've got to set goals that are realistic and they got to feel doable because if they feel like a stretch from the start, it's going to be hard to implement them if you're looking for consistency and sustainability, right? The reach
yes.
goals, like season goals for like a race or things like those can be scary, right? So
Okay,
there's some
perfect.
nuances there.
I'm glad
Yeah,
you added that because I literally just typed out like big audacious goal question mark.
exactly. Yep. Yeah.
Like, wait, we can still have that, right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So I
And
say, like, yeah, have a big audacious goal. And then we set little goals to help you get there.
yep, I
Mhm.
love that. And I think actually the exercise that you just mentioned, the like how you want people to see you at the end of the season, I think is such a
Mhm.
great exercise to think about because A, when you picture it, you kind of start thinking about like who the important people are in your life. Like you kind of picture, is
Exactly.
it your family? Was it your friends? Is it your teammates? Is it your partner? Is it
Exactly.
your like running bestie? Is it your competitor on the podium in your life?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's
Yeah.
funny, I think about this actually both of those the two things kind of came to a head for me at Leadville. I was running it this summer and I sprained my ankle and I was
Yes.
hobbling on that foot trying to like
Yes.
tell myself it was an ankle roll and I'd be fine and
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
a lot of women passed me. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of women that I really wanted to beat passed me.
Yep.
And I had the moment of being like really pissed and then just being
Yes.
like, wait, how do I want these women to like think of me and like see me at
Exactly.
the end of the race?
Yes. Yes.
And so I started
Mhm.
just like cheering for them like crazy and just like smiling and like, telling them they were doing
Exactly.
awesome, like all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because we just had Zoe Rome on the podcast a few weeks ago. And she's one of the women, she was the first woman that passed me.
Nice.
Like, and she moved into third. And she was just
Yep.
like, yeah, I remember that. And like your
Mm-hmm.
attitude was like so good, even though it was like the shittiest day that you could possibly
Totally.
have. And I like
Exactly.
it just like made my life when I
Yeah.
was like, okay, so I didn't hit my big hairy
Exactly.
audacious goal,
Mm-hmm.
but
But I'm proud of how I
I
showed up.
I finished exactly the way that I wanted to show up to my competitors.
Yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
love
Yeah.
that.
And you can be competitive. Like, I think there's often,
Exactly.
we're afraid of being like, well, if I show up the way I want, like, no, you can also be really unapologetic and, take wheels from people and take up space and go like attack in the Peloton. Like, I'll have athletes say, like, set a goal. I don't care what place you're in. One of my athletes the other day sent me a message. She's like, this was the best and worst 25 minutes of my life. She was in a solo breakaway for 25 minutes. And I'm like, I don't even want to know how it finished. And and she was dead last. And it was amazing because she took a huge risk. And that's what we have been working on together is like, you belong here, make a move, do it in a really unapologetic way. Like that's where the good stuff is, right? So
Oh,
it's not always on the race results.
exactly. Yeah. And that's where that process over performance really plays out
Exactly.
because, yeah, that solo breakaway didn't work this time. But you know what? It
Exactly.
provided so much information and so
Yep.
many lessons. And
Yep. And the
next
mental
time,
muscles that she had to flex
oh,
during that 25 minutes, great workout mentally and physically. So, yeah, it
yes,
was great.
yes. Okay. This is leading us into talking self-sabotage, which
Mm-hmm.
I love as a topic. We often talk about the most like ostentatious self-sabotage we always see is like you're on the start line and you always hear from like at least a couple people. They're like, "Oh, I rode here, so I'm like a little tired." Or
Totally.
like, "Oh, I already like did, X, Y." Like they're basically setting themselves up for
Mm-hmm.
why they're going to do badly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And like they've even like they're not lying or like some of them are always like, I'm sick.
Right.
You're like, "Are
Like
you
they're
though?"
trying to provide context for
Exactly.
future results that they haven't yet. Like, we don't even know how you might do great.
I
I see
call
this
it
all
the
the time when, like,
pre-excuse. Yeah.
yeah, like Zwift. I see it all the time in the Zwift
In the
comments.
comments.
And like, especially right before races, or like, on my own Zwift team, like, oh, I didn't sleep well last night. So I don't know what I've got today. And I fall into the same trap too. Like, just because I'm a sports psychologist
Oh
doesn't
yeah.
mean I also don't self sabotage. Like, I totally do. So yeah, that's a really big thing. Um, it can show up in a lot of different ways. Like, I think, I often talk about it in this idea of, we call it towards moves or away moves. So towards moves, that's when you're like moving towards your values, how you want to show up as a racer, athlete, person. Away moves, these are the things that happen when we get, I say, like hooked or caught by difficult thoughts, difficult feelings, difficult situations. As humans, we just don't like discomfort. And which is ironic because as endurance athletes, we're consistently signing up for it. That said, when there are egos on the line or goals or things that we really care about, and there's a chance of not succeeding, that's the rub. Those are those difficult thoughts and feelings that show up. And then we will unintentionally move away from our value system into self sabotage. So, what does this look like for athletes? In general, it's often short term fixes or relief or rewards over long term gratification or long term benefits. So it's like skipping warm ups or cool downs, leading to poor physical preparation, right? Engaging a lot of negative self talk or doubting our abilities, kind of that hedging or buffering language before or after.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lack of focus during training sessions, just kind of going through the motions. Um, there's like blaming a poor performance on equipment, conditions, officials, course conditions, competitors, you name it. Um, Not taking accountability for it, poor sportsmanship, um, not communicating with coach. So if you have a coach and you use Training Peaks, for example, just like not adding any comments or context to how you're feeling.
Yep. Yep.
So that's an unintentional form of this self-sabotage because coach isn't then able to respond to how your body is responding to the training plan, right? Like, you've got to communicate. So some of the other ways it shows up is even just things nutrition, hydration, not staying as dialed as we could, taking shortcuts with sleeping patterns or sleep hygiene, doom scrolling on the phones. Like, again, all of these, like, short term, this is more comfortable in the moment, but it's not actually helping me show up as the athlete I want to be. Another really sneaky way that I see this with endurance athletes is we like to plan, but we don't always do. So,
Ooh.
like, planning the race calendar is a form of procrastination for doing the actual workout, or overanalyzing past performances, or obsessing over who's registered for the race, who's on bike reg, who has signed up, what are their power profiles. Let's look at their Strava. What type of volume have they been doing? Being really critical of yourself, like the comparison game, right? If you're self-coached like I am, revamping your own training plan instead of just doing the training plan.
Yep, yep.
So or appointment, like, bike maintenance, important equipment adjustments, things like that. So it's really sneaky how it tends to show up.
Yes. And you know what? It's funny. I'm seeing a lot of people starting to kind of like try to get off of social media. And I'm actually noticing a lot of those people, though, go to Strava and spend their time. I'm going to call it doom scrolling Strava
Totally.
instead.
Mm-hmm.
I keep laughing, and I think I've probably said it on the show before. I've definitely said it on other ones. I was at Camp Strava in the past in May, and it was an awesome time. All the new features of Strava, super cool, really
Mm-hmm.
amazing community. But one woman was leading this panel about community on Strava. And she was just like, I just love Strava because it's just the most positive social network. Like, you can never go on and feel bad when you're on Strava. And me and like three other cyclists just looked at each other,
Give each
and
other
you
the
could see
side
us
eye.
all just like, I'm sorry, I've never gone on Strava and felt good about myself.
Totally. Yeah, it's the comparison game. It's tricky. Yep.
We were dying. We were just like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my God, I've never, like, I go on Instagram and I don't feel bad about myself at all. But I
Right.
go on Strava and I'm
Right.
like, I am a disaster
Right.
of an athlete. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Uh,
I went to a talk with Dylan Johnson from the Lifetime Grand Prix last season, and he showed us at the talk his Strava. So anyone listening, go to his Strava profile and look to see how many people he's following. It's zero. He's following zero people. And there, I don't know how many tens of thousands followers he has, right? And so I took that from him and I was like, okay, I'm unfollowing everyone because now my feed is just me and my
mhm.
dad and my mother-in-law. I am following two people. That's it. People can follow me if they want to, but
Yep.
I'm not likely to get sucked into the training volume or what other people are doing for workouts. And I'm able to focus on what I have because I decided that for a reason, right?
Yep. Yep. I always say to my friends, I'm like, it's not that I don't want to kudos you. I just can't do it for my own mental health. Like
Exactly.
like my mental well-being does not let me go and scroll and see what you're doing.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so I do want to hone in on this. We mentioned self-talk, and I think there's this
Mhm.
level of self-awareness required for athletes to even be aware of their self-talk. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you can maybe speak about how an athlete who's like, huh, this is sounding familiar, but I don't think I really talk to myself negatively. How do we catch
Mhm.
our self-talk?
It's so hard. It's so sneaky. So usually what it shows up as, like, we kind of have to play it out. So, and often in the moment you're not going to recognize it. So that's the power of the reflection afterwards. And so I'll give you an example. In this case, it's a team that I work with. We were talking about procrastination with homework, but really it could apply to anything. And I was like, okay, so how are you showing up? What are you doing instead? Oh, conveniently spending more time at the gym because then I don't have to go home and do homework. I'm like, okay, relatable. And then it's like, okay, so what is it that you're procrastinating on? Is it a specific assignment? Yep, it was a certain subject. And then I'm like, okay, so what is your brain saying to you right now when we say, I want you to sit down and do this thing? What comes up? And it was like this anxiety of like, oh my gosh, that's so much to do. And I'm like, okay, good. So that's one statement is this is so much, right? Often so it's kind of play it out and go down the rabbit hole of like, then what? And then what? And then what? So often at the end of the rabbit hole is some sort of, I'm not good enough, or I'm not ready, or I can't do this. And so it's kind of looking for those because those narratives are probably going to show up, or like, I don't belong here. That's another pretty common theme. And so I think that just looking for those themes can be helpful. And then you can do kind of different tips and tricks. It's funny because one of the main kind of core components of sports psychology that I share with people is you don't have to, like, your feelings and your emotions and thoughts don't have to match your actions or your performance. So you can have negative self-talk and self-doubt and anxiety, and you can still show up, and you can show up for yourself. And in fact, you can also perform really well. It's just the relationship that you have with those thoughts that dictates how you show up. So it's like we have to develop a relationship with the thoughts where we just see it as mental chatter or white noise behind the scenes. I often joke of like having a little minion on your shoulder yapping away, or like the angel and the devil from cartoons,
Totally.
or like, yeah, just little kind of narrative where it's just noise.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other common self-sabotage things that we haven't touched on that we need to get to before I get into more mental
Yeah.
training?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I named all the main ones. I think one other one, um, distractions, just distractions in general, whether it's phones, technology, yeah, planning, opting out and avoiding and isolating can be really big. So it might be someone feels like they're not ready to do a certain event or certain race, even though they probably are ready. So that could be a form of self sabotage is like, no, I'm not going to throw my hat into this lottery. I'm not ready for it. Like, well, see what happens. And you've got time to train. The lottery is open really early for a reason.
Yep.
So yeah, so those are some of the other ones that come up.
Yeah. Do you find that one is a bit more on the women's side versus the men's side? 'Cause there is that whole like
1000%.
yeah, the
Yes,
stat of like
totally.
men will apply for the job if they're like 60%
60%.
qualified.
Yes. Yeah. And women are like, oh, but I don't have this one thing. I better not do it. Yeah.
The
Hmm.
number of I always say like the number of men who just think that they can just do Leadville, just
Hmm.
no problem. Like
Hmm.
from sea level, no mountain bike experience, just like could just go do it, no
Hmm.
problem.
Yep.
Is astonishing.
Yep.
And even
Yeah.
my first 100 mile there, 100 miler, I'm like running next to this guy and I'm like, he's running with like a Jansport backpack as his pack.
Totally.
And I'm
Yes.
like, what are you? He's like, oh, I've never run more than like 20 miles before,
Yeah.
but I like decided to do this weekend.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen that with too, like Unbound, like jeans. And I'm like, kudos to you for making that happen. And like, oof, there are so many other ways. Like
Yeah, yeah.
yep.
Just hard yikes on the chafing with that.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. So there is a huge gendered component. I do think so. And I think there's also, I've done a lot of research on like gender disparities in cycling, what increases, decreases the likelihood of women registering. And one of the other, it's the timestamp. It just takes so much time to train. And so for anyone who is a parent or juggling a lot of different things, the gendered stuff is very real. And so I think that also prevents women. And then the other thing is once we train and show up, if we are only 10% of the field or less, like we don't always have a great time. And so there's a reality to that as well. So that's why it's like the race directors have to work really hard to make sure that they are supporting the women who are there. And like Marley Blonsky talked about this during her keynote at the summit, is like make sure the aid stations are open for everyone. Don't
Right?
start packing up early because that's not a fun experience, especially when you're, running low on fuel or nutrition or hydration and relying on an aid station and like, oh, sorry, we're all out.
Yeah,
So race directors also have a huge responsibility in that part.
100%. Although I'm gonna throw this out there. I was actually just speaking at a race director conference last weekend, and I actually got super pissed because we were taught like the question got asked of a couple race directors of like, how do we get more women? It
Mm-hmm.
was women and like other communities that are not necessarily like comfortable at your races. So people of
Mm-hmm.
color, minority groups.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy just started talking about how at his race, they do all of this great stuff for the bottom 40 people, like the
Ooh.
last 40. So like
Mm-hmm.
they get like, swag for the last 40 people. I'm like, cool, cool. But did you just imply that the last 40 people are the minorities and the women?
Right.
That's a
Yes.
great way to look at this.
Right.
I was
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
oh my
Yep.
God.
It's like one of my pet peeves I often say is one of the things that drives me nuts is when people say, at least I didn't finish last. I'm like, what's wrong with finishing last? Nothing. Nothing is wrong. And yes, we're in sport and it's all about competition and comparison. And also the people who finish last are out there a lot longer than you are.
Oh my
So and
gosh.
like have a lot
Yes.
more to deal with and grapple with in the mental games that we play because they are out there that much longer. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. When you realize that, yeah, the people that are, especially when you get into like ultra distance running, you're talking about,
Hmm.
people are winning the race at 15 hours and there are people
Hmm.
that are out for 48. Like,
Exactly. Yep.
like the 48-hour people, I find like their mental toughness is so much
Wildly different
higher.
experience. Yes,
So much
exactly.
higher.
Yes, yes. And the like the mental strength it takes to show up in when you don't always feel like you belong.
Yeah.
Like the pros who are clocking the 15-hour races, they likely feel like they belong there. Like that is not the
Hmm.
case for a lot of people. And we have to remember that too. So,
Yes, absolutely. Also, tampons at aid stations and places where women can change them. That would be
mm-hmm,
great.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's get into some of like the actual how do we actually do mental training?
Yeah.
And so one of the
Mm-hmm.
one of the things you wanted to chat about is like how to actually do the mental training and what to expect during the process. And like
Yes.
spoiler, it's not going to be as fun or as sexy as we
Mm-mm.
think it is. Because I think
Right.
to my makeover montage allusion earlier, we all
Mm-hmm.
kind of wish mental toughness was just kind of this like 3 minute song medley where now we're ready
Totally.
to go.
Yeah. Like, okay, check that box. Now I'm good. So think of it as physical training. The more consistent you are, the better. Consistency over intensity all day, every day. So for mindfulness meditation is one of the best, like this is well researched meta-analyses show mindfulness meditation is one of the best things anyone can do when it comes to mental performance. Really, really big effect sizes, which basically means it will make a difference. So mindfulness meditation, the thing that really stinks is it is pretty underwhelming when you're doing it. And so people will often start, and there's also a lot of misconceptions, which again, this is why we had this talk at the summit. It's like a lot of people assume that the point of meditation is to clear your mind. Nope, that's not the point. The point of meditation is to start focusing on something, get distracted because you're human and that's what's going to happen. Notice when you get distracted and bring yourself back. Every time you notice that you get distracted and bring yourself back, that's a rep, just like you're lifting weights. And the more often you do that, especially if you're doing it every day, you start to notice the thoughts. So this gets back to that self-talk is like a lot of people don't know what their self-talk is. Meditation is going to help you with that because you pay attention to the thoughts and the narrative, the stories, as random as they can be in your head when you're meditating. And then you get distracted and you bring yourself back to your breath or counting or whatever it is that you're focusing on. And that has really cool implications for performance because then if you're used to doing it when you're not racing, it'll start to leak into other areas of your life, including when you're racing. And then you are way less likely to go down those dark and stormy rabbit holes and get jerked around by your thoughts and feelings and the pain cave moments. And like, I shouldn't be doing this. I want to quit. I don't belong here. So and so just passed me. I thought I was faster than her. Like all that stuff, you're not going to get hooked by it. And so you just notice it. Like, it's like, oh, my brain has a lot to say today. Noted. And keep moving. Right. And so the mental training, what it really looks like, I'm a huge proponent of mindfulness meditation, as boring as it is. For anyone who says they suck at it, that's kind of the point, is to lean into that and get distracted, bring yourself back. Other
Okay.
forms of mental
So wait, what's
training.
our
Yeah.
prescription for that? What's our
Oh
like,
yeah,
do
yeah.
we know what the
Mm-hmm.
time is where it's like what's the
Mm-hmm.
most effective? What's our minimum effective dose?
Yes, yeah. So a lot of the research will suggest like anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes a day. That said, this goes back to full circle the habits. Intensity is not like if you do 30 minutes one day and then nothing for another 2 weeks, and then you do 20 minutes a day, like that's not going to help you nearly as much as if you were to do 2 minutes every day. So
Right.
focus on consistency and whatever it is that's sustainable. Um, Give it at least 2 weeks, and then you'll probably start noticing differences. Kind of like antidepressants and psych meds, frankly. Like it needs time to kind of like start, you're working your brain literally.
Yeah.
And so you have to start helping those neurons so that they're used to, we say like what fires together, wires together. So you're working on those connections every time you're doing that. So give it at least 2 weeks. And then you'll start to notice you'll be less reactive, a little less spicy, I like to say,
I like that.
a little more chill and calm and curious. And you won't get jerked around quite as much as you might normally by difficult workouts or things, quote unquote failed workouts, things like that.
Okay. Now,
Yeah.
my next follow up to that is what about the people that, and this is maybe even like two separate questions. There's a lot of
Hmm.
people that say like riding is my therapy, running is my therapy.
Oof.
Um,
Yes.
so I would
I
like
have
to
so
unpack
many
that.
thoughts.
I would like to
Yes.
unpack that, but also then
Yes.
I'm sure a lot of people just heard that and are like, oh,
Mhm.
30 minutes. Well, I train for 30 minutes at least a
I
day. So
know.
I could just do my mindfulness while I train. So
Right.
how does that unpack that and then maybe the
Yes.
running as therapy?
Totally. Yeah. So, if you are, so as humans, we suck at multitasking. Every time that we think we're multitasking, we're just switching, 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 switching. And so, and a really classic example would be, for example, you get a push notification on your phone and you read the text message in the middle of a conversation. So your attention is going to the phone and then it's going back to the conversation. So if you want to try meditating while riding, you are not actually meditating. You are riding and then remembering to meditate and riding and remember, like, it's not going to work. So, and one of the things, if you think about it from sports psych, we often talk about it's called deliberate practice or intentional practice. This comes from the 10,000 hour rule that has been unfortunately over generalized or oversimplified. One of the main components of that is to be fully present in whatever it is you're doing. And so when you're riding, ideally, you're fully present when you're riding. When you're meditating, you're fully present when you're meditating. We're not splitting all of these tasks to be more efficient because it's actually way less efficient. So that's my first kind of thing to that, first response to that. Riding as therapy, yes, it can be therapeutic. It is not therapy. So riding can be therapeutic, running can be therapeutic. I have worked out so many skeletons in the closet and battled so many demons in my brain, especially about 2/3 into the race of the really long races. Like
Oh yeah.
we have some stuff to work out, but that's exactly it, is like that helps us find the knots in a sense. Therapy will help you work those knots out, right? So if we use it as like an analogy of like, a massage therapist or body work, right? Um, we'll find or notice these knots in our body. Riding or running, we'll notice the stuff that we need to process because we're spending a lot of time in our head with our thoughts. We then have to take those to therapy and process them there. So those are my thoughts for that. Is it can be helpful for mental health. It's not a replacement.
Love that. Love that. Do you find, or you've probably, had people come in that people who are riding and running and doing this, but are afraid to let the knots go, to kind of torture your metaphor a little bit,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
where they're afraid that if they start working some of this stuff out, they
Yes.
might not have the same desire to keep running or riding as their therapy.
Totally. Yeah. It's wild. And it's like, I was actually talking about this with one of my athletes the other day because, like, historically, they've been a really competitive person. And they still are, but they're not taking themselves so seriously anymore. And it is so cool to see, but that is kind of scary
Yeah.
because it kind of gives them an edge in a sense. But that edge isn't necessarily healthy. And so it's, because that edge can also come with rigidity and forcing workouts if you don't have enough time or you're really stressed and you're not willing to adapt your training plan. And then that leads to injury and burnout and sickness and overtraining and all these other things. So what I often say to athletes is like, well, if you're afraid of trying something new, like, one, what you're currently doing probably isn't working because you're here. And then two, try it, just experiment and see. Like for anyone who knows anything about like marketing, you say like test it, you know?
Yep.
So test it, try something else, try meditating for 2 weeks. If you hate it, okay, cool. Go back to what you've been doing. Fine. Right. So like you get to be the expert of your own experience, but I always say give it a shot. That said, what I will say, and this is kind of one of those like nuances as a sports psychologist, is like in the middle of the season, I personally don't think it's best to unpack a lot of trauma. Um, and that's where I get kind of, I'll stand on a soapbox and saying it's really important to find a therapist. Like if you've got stuff to work out, someone who understands where you are in your season and how that's going to affect your performance in your training. Because if we've got a lot of stuff, it's kind of like going up in the attic to clean out the cobwebs. When you first go up there, you're going to kick up a lot of dust and it's going to suck.
Yep.
But you need to do that in order to clean house. So you have to be really intentional on when you do that quote unquote deeper work.
Yeah. And I think, like I like that you're saying that not as like, oh, this is just as it would apply to a pro. I think this, both of us think that this can apply to
All
anyone
athletes.
because, for someone unpacking something that is, yeah, like on the traumatic
Mhm.
side, if it
Yep.
wrecks their season, that actually I would say probably has the power to set them back
Yeah,
further because now there's like
I
even
agree.
worse associations and
Hmm.
yeah. So
Yep.
get through
And
the
often
season.
sport, like sport often helps our athletic identity and our identity as a person. It gives us community. It gives us a sense of satisfaction. There are ups and downs, of course. But if you start to really struggle in sport as well, then it's not fun for anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
okay. Only shifting gears slightly over.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah.
now, I think everyone listening to this is using running or riding as some type of therapeutic
Hmm.
thing in the moment. It really feels like,
Hmm.
kind of regardless of what your various beliefs are, the world is a terrifying place right now, I think
Yep.
is like the blanket statement.
Yeah.
Um,
Really just like divisive climate, really contentious. There are a lot of feelings. Yeah.
A lot of feelings, a lot of feelings. So I think it's understandable that, everyone is kind of caught in these, anxiety spirals and doom
Yep.
scrolling and
Hmm.
all of that. And I know for me, I've been swinging from being like completely normal, getting stuff done to, oh God, I just want to go back to bed and pull the covers over my head and just not come
Yeah.
out.
Yes. Hmm.
And
Yes.
and exercising helps like a little bit, but it's when you're exercising, then you actually have the space to start thinking, which can start the spiraling.
Right.
So,
Yes.
um, you know, let's talk about like broader scale how, the current very stressy time we are living in can impact people's training and racing in the different ways, and
Yep.
how can we keep
What
moving
to
through
do about
this?
it.
How to help?
Hmm.
Yeah, help.
Yes, totally. Oh, it's been such a big thing. Like the past few weeks has been so as a therapist, it's so hard. Because everyone is responding so differently and trying to, it's like I'm used to not having solutions. That's part of my job, frankly, is to be like, I don't have the answers.
Yeah.
But this is especially tough. And so what I often say to athletes, one, especially if they're not working with a coach and they're following like a general training plan, or they're even using like Trainer Road or some of those things, training plans are not built with life stress in mind. So that's really important to remember, especially for the athletes who like to go for the green and training peaks, or they like to get all of the check marks. Because if you have a really, really stressful day, it is really important to be able to listen to your body, because life TSS is also a thing. And
Ooh, life
so
TSS.
the
I love
past
it.
couple of weeks, there's been a lot of life TSS. Like there are a lot of unknowns, a lot of things are changing. And so stress levels have skyrocketed for a lot of people, especially because whenever there are unknowns, like that is a recipe or breeding ground for anxiety and misinformation on social media and all of that stuff. Right. So when we've got more stress, we've got to give ourselves more grace and flexibility with our training plans. Because if we pretend that we're not stressed and we continue to train when we are stressed, we're signing ourselves up for sickness or injury or both, frankly. So, and that's where it's going back to kind of the training peaks. And if you've got a coach, you've got to communicate with coach to let them know how you're feeling. And if you've had a really awful week, you don't have to share all the dirty details, but just let them know so that they can also adapt. And rest is not punishment. And so it's like, if they say, like, let's give you a couple of extra rest days, it's not because they don't think you can't handle the workouts. It's not about that. It's about, okay, your body is going to be going through a lot right now because of the stress that you're feeling. So let's not push it over the edge. Let's listen to it. Right.
Oh, rest is not a punishment. I want to put that on a t-shirt.
Right? Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
So that's the
so
most
good.
important thing, right? Is like, okay, life TSS. So then what do we do about it? Um, there's a concept that also comes from acceptance and commitment therapy called workability. And the whole idea behind it is we ask ourselves, is this working for me? So are the thoughts working for me? When I say, I'm not ready for this race, I can't do this, I should just quit. are those thoughts working for you when you like really lean into them, or if you let them dictate your life? Probably not. So we've got to let them go. So in this case, is doom scrolling for 2 hours before going to bed working for me? Get curious about it. Probably not working for you. Would something else work better for me? Probably. That something else is going to be probably unplugging. And it could be arts and crafts. It could be time with a loved one. It could be gentle movement or mobility or PT that you've been neglecting, or, pick your thing, time with the family, an early bedtime, right? And then it's asking yourself, okay, what other things could I be doing that can also keep me informed? Because I think that's the other piece is, people want to hide under the covers or like immerse themselves in the fire hose of information and not knowing what is accurate and what isn't. So that's like, okay, pick your sources and pick your thing and give yourself some sort of time frame. So for me, I just personally listen to like NPR in the morning, NPR one. That's just part of my morning routine. And that's when I get my news. I know other people they'll check the New York Times over the lunch hour, right? Pick whatever your outlet is and then give yourself a container so that you set some boundaries around it. And that can help quite a bit. And then really checking the social media and kind of who you're following, because the algorithm it's always looking for that watch time. And so the more time you spend looking at certain things, the more you're going to get. So we think about like some of the really devastating news, like, the recent plane crash with the figure skating team in the Black Hawk helicopter. Like the more videos I watched on that, the more content on that I got. Right. So you've got to be really tricky with that.
Yeah, and then the same applies to like, it used to be kind of like fun to hate watch few of
Right.
the like influencers and stuff, but now the
Yes.
problem is like that's not just like,
It'll give
oh,
you
you're
more.
following them and like so they're showing up. No, it's if you
Yeah.
watch that, even if you're watching it kind of like resentfully or like to kind of
Yeah.
cringe
Or
at
like, I
it,
can't believe they said this.
yeah,
Like,
it's
you're
gonna
going to get
keep
more.
giving you, yeah. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think
So it's being a
that's
critical consumer of the information and also having boundaries with family and friends and loved ones. Like a lot of people are scared and their way of kind of processing is to talk about it, but that doesn't
mhm.
mean that you have to be on the receiving end. So it's also okay to be like, hey, I've got a lot on my plate. Like right now, I know you care a lot about this. I'm not in the mood to be able to have this conversation, or I don't have the capacity to have this conversation today. Like, love you,
Yep.
thanks.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. So important. And I think,
Yeah,
this is very important for like the group ride and the group run because this stuff is coming up.
totally.
Right?
Yep. Yeah. Hmm.
So I think it's
Yeah.
totally okay to, yeah, say to your friends, like, okay, this is like let's just talk about bikes today.
Yep.
That's all I can handle right now.
Yep.
Thanks.
Like
And I think
brain
that's
needs a
great.
break.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah. And I
Oh,
think one final thing I'll say on this one, there's an author I really like to follow. His name's Oliver Berkman. He does a lot of
oh,
work
he's
on,
great.
yeah. So just kind of this like information economy that we're in. And his most recent book, Meditations for Mortals, is a really good read for anyone, especially with this kind of climate that we're in. It's great. And one of the things he says is, like we can't stay on top of all of the information. It's just not possible. Even if we're listening to audiobooks at 2 times the speed and podcasts and this and that, like trying to get it all in. So just it's okay to just throw up your hands and recognizing you're not going to get it all in. Same thing for the news. And then for the news, when you feel like the world is like spinning really quickly and you can't keep up with it all, pick your battles. You don't have to be an expert in everything because
Hmm.
back to priorities, everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And so, same thing with politics and the news cycle. Like, you can't stay on top of all of it. So, pick the things that you care most about, where you feel like you do want to contribute, and then be more intentional with it. So,
Oh, love that. Love that. Okay. Well, we could keep going all day, and I think we're gonna have you back on for like a
yes.
race day specifics because we didn't
Oh,
even
yes.
scratch
Oh,
that
I
surface.
know. Yeah, we can
I,
totally talk about that.
but before I let
Yeah.
you go, tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find the summit, where they can work with you, all the things.
Yes, all the things. Instagram is the easiest way to find us, and that's where we're most active. So that's Scotty Sports Psychology. It's SKADI. And then website, scottysportspsychology.com. There's a banner at the top where you can click on that to get all the summit information if you want to get the all access pass. Um, And then in working with us, so we just hired, or actually, well, by the time this comes out, we'll have just hired a new provider who will have immediate availability, which is huge because we haven't had immediate availability for over a year at this point. So for athletes who really want to get on top of their season, he's also an elite endurance runner and a high school track and field cross country coach. So like he knows his stuff. He's licensed for mental health therapy in Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And then he can do mental performance coaching everywhere and anywhere. So anyone who wants to get on top of their season and wants to give sports psych a try, that's a really great way to do it. Anyone looking for a therapist who also is an athlete, Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin. So, and we've got all that information on our website, and we'll have a lot of it on Instagram as well.
Oh, so exciting.
It's super exciting. It's fun. Yeah.
So cool. Oh, well, thank you so much, Erin. This is so amazing. And yes, you're definitely you have to come back.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been so fun. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.